Welcome to another edition of Anthony T's Horror and Wrestling Show. I'm Anthony T. Now, this edition of Anthony T's Horror and Wrestling Show is a best of show. Now, normally, once in a while, when nothing's happening or I get bogged down with stuff, I will do a best of show. I haven't had time to record an episode this month, but I figured why not do a best of show right now, just to get things moving. As I hope from here on in, it'll be every 2 weeks. You'll have a new episode, as it's been tough trying to get back to the regular 2-week schedule lately. But this episode will hold you over till next episode. As in this episode, it's going to be an interviews only episode. Meaning, I'm going to highlight 2 of my favorite interviews. And then afterwards, I'll highlight one of my favorite What's Anthony T Watching segments. And trust me, it's a crazy film from Troma that you can only see on the Troma Now streaming service. But first, I have 2 interviews, both from the Anthony T's Horror Show era of the podcast. And they are separate eras of this podcast. First, it was the Anthony T's Horror Show era. Then I decided to start a new era of the podcast earlier this year and add wrestling to the podcast to make it Anthony T's Horror and Wrestling Show. But these interviews here are coming from the Anthony T's Horror Show era. In fact, everything in Volume 4 of the Best Of is from the Anthony T's Horror Show era. First, I'm going back to episode 51, where I interviewed author Patrick Rahall to talk about his book, How Much Do You Tip an Exorcist? That's a very fun interview. The book is currently available through Source Point Press. Then afterwards, I'll be going to episode 54, and you'll get to hear my interview with Benjamin Scrivens, the owner of Fright-Rags. Both very good interviews. Then afterwards, I will have a retro What's Anthony T Watching segment, where I talk about a film that's on Troma Now. I hope you enjoyed the 4th volume of the Best of Anthony T's Horror and Wrestling Show. And I'll be back after with some upcoming notes about the podcast and other projects that yours truly is involved in. Every day there's a family struggling with hospital bills to care for their sick child who is fighting an illness. There's a woman who is fighting breast cancer and is having trouble making ends meet while paying for their treatment. And there are burn victims that are going through treatments to heal their deep wounds. There is a charity in the horror community that helps these people. Scares That Care is an organization that helps families deal with the bills for their child. They help women get the treatment they need to fight breast cancer, and they help people who are dealing with severe burns get the help they need to heal. Scares That Care is a 100% volunteer organization and 501c3 nonprofit charity that is dedicated to helping these people in fighting real monsters. To find out more information or to donate to Scares That Care, you can go to www.scaresthatcare.org. Every donation helps Scares That Care fight real monsters. Besides Anthony T's Horror Show, you can also listen to these other fine podcasts on the Doc Discussions Network. Doc Discussions, hosted by Philip Perrone and Michael Darwin. You Know Nothing, Jon Snow, a Game of Thrones podcast. Bullets, Brothels, and Bots, a Westworld podcast. Halloween Boutique, Psychotronic Reviews. And Searching for American Gods. You can find Doc Discussions on the web at www.docdiscussions.com. And Doc Discussions is also available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. Welcome back to Anthony T's Horror Show. I'm here with author Patrick Rahall. You may know him because he's already been on the podcast earlier this year along with Ashes Von Nightmare. You know him mostly as Patsy the Angry Nerd from Throwdown Thursday and Shock Bites. He is here today to talk about his debut book, How Much Do You Tip an Exorcist? How are you doing today, Patrick?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you so much for wanting to talk about the book. I really appreciate it.
Now, before we get to everything, since you're a podcaster, I'm a podcaster, and last segment on my podcast, I talked about the Craft Legacy trailer, which ended up like one of my long-winded rants, which we're not going to hear about anymore from me. What are your thoughts on the trailer?
Well, I enjoyed the original, but it seems to me that what Blumhouse has done with their last couple of big trailers like this and Black Christmas, where they're remaking, beloved properties, is they give away the entire movie in the trailer, and so there's no reason to see the movie. Like in Black Christmas, I was like, oh, well, that's a twist. Oh, I didn't know that was going to happen. Oh, okay. Well, that's fun. And you revealed who the bad guy was. Okay, I don't need to see this movie. And then watching this trailer, it seemed like whoever the director was, I don't think she had any say in what the trailer was, because the original film, it was basically, and I'm blanking on her name, but like the one girl against the other three, and she was good and they were all bad. And now this trailer is absolutely 100% she's bad and she's more powerful, and the other three have to band together to defeat her. That's absolutely what's going on. And just throwing in a picture of Fairuza Balk and, her catchphrase there, we are the weirdos, mister, isn't enough for me. It's not. Like, I didn't get the Craft vibes from this. I got, any of those, like, Carrie, or any of those movies with kids with psychokinetic powers. That's what I got out of this. Like, I didn't see magic or anything. I mean, obviously, like, the little things are like, oh, look, we did your makeup. Oh, look, we did this. It seemed more to me like people with superhero powers. It's like they turned it into a superhero film more than a film about girls battling through witchcraft. I don't know what you thought, but I
can tell you, I really felt sad for David Duchovny and Michelle Monaghan being attached to this film.
Yeah, I don't think. I think they're definitely going to be bright spots in this, and I don't want to cast any aspersions on the actresses who were playing the four teens there, because they seemed like they're really into it, and from what I saw in the trailer, they seemed to be doing a decent job. It's not their fault that the script is so heavy-handed and just like, again, why would you give away everything in the trailer? Like, I hate that. Like, leave some intrigue.
I know, it's been the typical Blumhouse formula lately with these remakes and sequels. Yeah. I even said in my rant, I think, or might have said in my rant, that Jason Blum is trying to ruin every horror film ever made.
You think it's like a long con where he's like this huge guy in horror, but he actually hates horror, and so he's trying to ruin it?
I don't think he hates horror. I just think he doesn't put the right people in. It's like, unless it was like David Gordon Green or Leigh Whannell, it always turns out badly in the trailer that you don't want to see the film.
And see, here's the thing that kind of bugged me, and it went with a couple other films. Like, I didn't see Black Christmas because I didn't have to, because I saw the trailer. I did recently watch Fantasy Island. And the problem is you get these really strong actors, Maggie Q, Michael Pena, and I forget who the young lady was. I want to call her like Haley something.
Lizzie Hale, I think?
Lizzie Hale, yeah. I was close. I got Haley out of Lizzie. But Lucy Hale.
Lucy Hale, yes.
Lizzie Hale is Hailstorm.
I was thinking House. I don't know why I said that.
No, it's close. See, we both were like right there on the cusp of it. You get strong performances from your crew, like your actors, but to come up, like I'm curious to know how much he is involved with the storylines and how much he's involved with cutting these trailers, because like Treasure Island, Jesus, Fantasy Island definitely didn't give away the plot, but like I don't know if you saw it, but I watched it and I was like, oh yeah, I remember this season of Lost. Like, what the fuck? Like, this is awful. Where's the smoke monster?
I have not seen Fantasy Island yet.
It's like Lost meets Moana.
Because I watched, I think the remake with Malcolm McDowell. Love that one.
Okay.
And it's like, because I know that remake was a television series. That was actually good. This one looks like it sucks. So I haven't had time to see it yet.
Again, it's got very strong performances from all the actors involved. Even the guy that starred with Michael Pena and Chips, Dax Shepard, that's who it was. Even he got a decent performance, and I was fairly impressed with how he did. He was good in that, but yeah, it was weird, and I wasn't a huge fan. But as far as the craft goes, I mean, again, I'm all for remakes. One of my favorite movies of all time, technically, is a remake. The Thing, 1982. But you and I think, are of a similar mind where we much prefer the independent creators to, the bigger budgeted Hollywood endeavors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some good Hollywood directors, like Lene Whannell, James Wan
from Saw.
Those
guys.
David Gordon Green.
Refresh me. Who he is and what he's done.
David Gordon Green?
Yeah.
He did the Halloween.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I knew the name. I just could not remember.
And I believe he also did Pineapple Express too.
That I didn't know there was a sequel, and I haven't seen the original.
No, Pineapple Express is actually a standalone film. And Halloween is like the reboot that he did a couple years ago.
Oh, you were saying Pineapple Express also. Sorry, I thought.
No, it's just Seth Rogen, James Franco.
Yeah, no, I do it. I thought you meant like he had done a sequel to that. Like, oh, I didn't know there was. It's just the way you said it. I took it as.
I was trying to say another film he did.
In addition to. No, I get you now. I was like, oh man, I've also been drinking rum for the past 3 hours. So, because I just got off a live podcast with my brothers and my wife talking sports, so I didn't quite get where you were going with that one. So yeah, sorry, that's my fault. Now that I listen back to what you're saying, yes, you articulated it correctly. I just heard it wrong.
Let's get on with the interview.
Yeah, let's do that.
Now, I know you mostly as a podcaster. How did you get into podcasting?
Getting into podcasting, it's a funny story. I have several friends who kind of inspired me, and it's funny, there's like a long line of folks who inspired them, and I kind of want to shout those guys out. So it started, I guess, with Outside the Cinema with Bill Fulkerson. And if you haven't, I know you're a big indie
Survival of the Film Freaks.
Yes. Yeah. Great film, available on Amazon to stream. They kind of inspired Trick or Treat Radio. And Trick or Treat Radio, they're all friends of mine. Actually, Johnny Wolfenstein, when we first started doing this podcast, was our producer. They invited me on one day, and it was my first ever podcast. It was Trick or Treat Radio, episode number 68, All the Boys Love Larry Fine. That was the name. And I had so much fun, and that was like December of 2013. And a few years later, I was thinking about it. I was like, I kind of want to start my own show. Like, I want to do my own show. Like, it's fun listening to shows, and when you're at home and you're listening, and I'm sure you've done this, and I'm sure your listeners are the same way. Like, you'll express an opinion, and like maybe you feel very strongly about a certain thing, like say about Blumhouse films, and somebody might vehemently disagree with you, and like they're yelling into the ether because you can't hear them because it's a recording. And it's like, oh, you know what? I think I want to start talking about my own thing. And my original show idea was I started doing this thing called Throwdown Thursday to kind of piggyback off the Throwback Thursday hashtag that was trending at the time. And I'm like, what if we took random characters and we had them face off against each other? Similar to like what Death Battle did, but instead of like doing all the research into physics and whatnot, we just had people vote. And that kind of built into what I was doing. And when I first did the first couple of episodes, it was with my friend Agent Nicole, who is no longer on the show. She did about 100 episodes with us, and it didn't work out. I didn't think it through as well as I would have liked because we also would record 2 episodes every other Saturday. So it was kind of a weird thing because you couldn't have people vote on something if you were recording every other Saturday. So it's like, oh, this show aired, on the 10th, and this show airs on the 17th, but they were both recorded prior to that, so you can't take any feedback for those shows because they're already recorded. Then Johnny Wolfenstein ended up moving to Maryland, and so we took over doing our own show. I learned how to, produce the show, and we got all our own equipment. And that was June, July of 2019. And now we've been going strong ever since. My wife Ash has joined on like the 3rd episode she came on, and she was like, wow, this is a lot of fun. I was like, see, I told you. And now we're about to drop. We're in the 220s at this point.
What made you want to step out of the podcasting and dive into the literary field?
Well, I've always enjoyed expressing myself creatively, whether it be like drawings or like little stories. Like I've been writing ever since I was a little kid, and around the time I was 12 or so around 6th grade, which would be 1993, I got really frustrated, and I was like, no one's going to read this stuff. Like, it's too crazy. It's too off the wall. Like, it's too dumb. No one's going to ever read this. So I'm just going to stick to reading instead of writing. I would read a lot of Stephen King, and I read a story called The Mangler, which is about a haunted laundry machine that kills people. And I was like, all right, well, nothing I write is going to be stupid in comparison. And they made The Mangler into a movie, and it has a sequel. So I was like, all right, nothing I could possibly write is going to be dumber than a haunted laundry machine that kills people. Now, as a premise, that's stupid, and I'm very much oversimplifying it, but there's, really good detail that goes into it, as Stephen King does, all about the whole, like the specific herbs, like belladonna gets, mixed in with some laundry, and like that gets exposed into the thing, and then a young girl cuts herself, and now they've got the blood of a virgin, and like you mix this with this, with this, with this, with this, and it creates sentience in this laundry machine. So there was some, actual research that went into it. Like I said, I'm very much oversimplifying it, but I read all kinds of stories. Like I read a lot of Norse mythology that I really enjoyed, Egyptian mythology, Greek and Roman, which is essentially the same thing. You just switch the names around. I enjoyed reading a lot, so I wanted to tell my own stories.
How did you come up with the title of the book that we're going to talk about? How much do you tip an Exorcist? And what made you want to have an offbeat title for this collection?
Well, the title came about because I was just talking with some people one day. It might have even been at work, and I was like, how come when you drive through at Dunkin's, you leave them a tip, but when you drive through at like McDonald's, you don't leave a tip? And then we started talking about other professions that would leave a tip, and like, well, how come you don't tip firefighters? but you tip like the pizza guy, like arguably the firefighter is doing a more important job. And then it just delved into, it devolved into like crazy stuff. It was a weird thing, but once I came up with that title, I was like, oh my God, that's going to be the title. And as you know, because you've gone through some of the horror haikus that are in it, that's kind of the subject of one of those horror haikus.
What was it like writing this book compared to all the podcasting you do?
Podcasting, you don't have to worry. At least I don't. I don't worry about editing myself. Like most of what you see, or if we do a live show, see or hear is just off the cuff. With, if I don't articulate an idea particularly well, I can just be like, wow, you know what I mean. If you're writing, it's different because you have to really draw your audience in and make them care about what you're talking about. With the podcast, sometimes, people are going to come in with a preconceived notion. It's like, well, I don't really care about, Godzilla, so I'm not going to listen to that episode. But I really like Doctor Strange, so I want to listen to their take on that. So with the book, when you're writing a story, you want to tell a complete narrative, but also keep your reader's attention until you get, to the end of the story. And hopefully that when folks read this, they'll get to the end of each story or each haiku or each 2-sentence story, and they'll say, okay, that was a complete narrative. I liked parts A, B, and C, and yeah, I feel satisfied with the end of that.
This book has 4 sections: 2-word sentences, horror haikus, short stories, and fake lists, including a list that the people at Sci-Fi are already reading as they are looking to make their next annoying Sharknado-type franchise for me to rant about.
Oh, I hope they do.
What gave you the idea to have separate sections instead of doing a traditional short story collection?
So a lot of this has to do with Jeanette Andromeda, who is the illustrator of this book and a beyond phenomenal artist. We did this thing back in 2015 called Horror Haikus Day. We had met at Rock and Shock and became friends, and we've been close friends since then. We were doing this thing called Horror Haikus Day, where I would come up with a haiku and she would illustrate it. And then I would see how great her art was, and she would post it on social media, for her Horror Made. Was the title it was going underneath. And, I would see her artwork and I was like, man, I have to step up my story game. But at the same time, she would, and she's told me this, I'm not, speaking out of school when I say this, she said that, my stories would make her push her art to another level. And so we both kept kind of pushing each other without realizing we were doing it. The 2-sentence stories kind of goes back to a thread on Reddit where folks, and I ended up seeing it on Facebook, and I did a bunch of them because I like to write, and, trying to come up with a complete narrative with 2 sentences is difficult. But there was a thread on Reddit talking about the scariest 2-sentence stories, and I think the one that ended up winning, I mean, I don't know if there was like an actual contest, but the one that everyone kind of agreed was the scariest was the last man on earth sat alone in his house, and there was a knock on the door. And it's, I tried to capture that a little bit. I think my favorite one, I know my favorite one is called The Muddy Boots, and I think it's, I don't know if it's on par with that. That's up for the reader to decide. But it says, I really hate when my husband leaves his muddy boots in the hallway. I don't mean to nag, but he was buried in them. Like, I just really like that. And then I had a bunch of short stories. I had released a book of short stories called Monsters in the Closet that I self-published. I do have a couple other books that I self-published, but they are absolute garbage. Going back and looking at some of the stuff I've written 10, 12 years ago compared to what I've written now, it's absolute trash. And I think that's a testament to me attempting to get better. And I tend not to promote myself that much, but with this, I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback. So I've kind of been pushing it more and more because I think I can tell good stories. And, with Monsters in the Closet, it was flash fiction, so it's 500 words or less. You have to tell an entire story, and it's difficult, but it's fun as a writer trying to challenge yourself, where it's like, okay, I have unlimited space. I can just tell whatever story I want. I can write a 1,200-page novel. It doesn't matter. But when you really pigeonhole yourself and it's like, okay, you have 500 words, you need a beginning, a middle, an end, a climax, a satisfying resolution. It's challenging, but it's a lot of fun. And I think the way this book is set up with all the different styles of writing, I think it fits people with a busy lifestyle. So it's like, I don't have time to read, this long novel. I mean, because it's about 150 pages, but there's, the horror haikus, the 2-sentence stories, the lists, in each of those stories, I think the longest story might be like 10 pages, if that. But, it's a lot of fun, and I wanted to kind of mix things up. If you're looking at a book that's the title is How Much Do You Tip an Exorcist, it can't be a standard cookie cutter, book that you're going to pick up from anybody,
What drew you to the 2-sentence stories?
That, like I was saying, is like the Reddit thread about the the last man on Earth, and I think part of it had to do with, can I tell a complete story with just 2 sentences? And I really got sucked into it. There's a whole bunch that didn't make it into this book. That maybe will be in another collection down the road, but there's a whole bunch that didn't make it into this. But I think for me it was the challenge of telling a complete story in only 2 sentences. Like you're not using every tool at your disposal, to explain what's going on and paint a word picture, but at the same time you're using every weapon in your arsenal in order to complete this story in just 2 sentences.
You also have a section after that called Horror Haikus. What made you want to focus on the Japanese style of poems compared to traditional poems?
Well, I mean, I guess that, all depends on what your definition of traditional poems. I mean, are we looking at sonnets, and, with rhyming couplets like Shakespeare did, quatrains, there's all kinds of different stuff. But I think with haikus, where you have the 5 syllables, the 7 syllables, and the 5 syllables, each line, the 3 lines comprising of a total of 17 syllables. That again is another one of those things, is like, can I tell an entire story with just 17 syllables? It's kind of like the 2-sentence stories. Can I tell a whole story in just 2 sentences? It was a lot of fun. It was challenging. Going back and forth. It's like, oh, I like this word better. And it's like, I can't use that word because now the sentence structure doesn't make sense. That was kind of difficult, but again, it was a lot of fun. And then getting to see the illustrations that Jeanette did to go along with some of these, like, she did all new illustrations for this book. She kind of took a couple of, she kind of took the bones of stuff that she had done before. And like I was saying, with like my stuff that was garbage back, 10, 12 years ago, her artwork was amazing back then in 2015 when she was doing this. It's phenomenal now. Like, if you consider phenomenal above amazing, like, she did such a great job. She has improved greatly. If you were able to see some of the stuff that she has done before, and then to take the same things and, turn them into, make just grayscale drawings. She was even nice enough to put myself and Ashes into 2 of the drawings. If you look under the haiku Costume and the haiku Daylight, Daylight, she definitely drew that character as my wife Ashes, and Costume is 100% me, down to the fact that he's got a patch on his vest that says Patsy on it, which I didn't notice when she originally did it. But I was like, oh man, she put me in the thing. Like, that's so cool. But yeah, for me, I think it was more the challenge than anything else.
What was it like working with Jeanette Andromeda on the book in trying to get your vision to how the artwork should look?
I trust Jeanette with my work because she is such a talented artist. If you've ever seen my podcast logo or any of the other shirts that we've done, like the Von Nightmare Vineyards shirt, where it's a bunch of grapes but it's all the grapes are different skulls. Or my Patsy logo, where it's kind of like the Jaws thing, but it's me coming up underneath a shark. I trusted her to take whatever I had done and, apply her unique vision to it, because there were a couple of things I was like, okay, this is what I would do. And then what she came up with, I was like, oh yeah, this is way better. This is way better than I even imagined. Like, I can't draw at the same level as Jeanette. Like, I can occasionally get something good to come out, but Jeanette is just light years ahead of me. And everyone's going to interpret things differently, and like the way I was looking at a couple of things, like there were a couple I had no clue what to do. Like, for the haiku gratuity, where I got the name of the book from, I had no clue how I was going to do that, and she took it and ran with it, and I was like, you know what, whatever she wants to do, that's how it's going to be. I mean, obviously she would say, hey, this is what I've got, do you like it? And I don't think I rejected a single thing, because I was like, this is just absolutely fantastic, and there's nothing I'm going to say that's going to improve or change this. Like, she is beyond talented, and I'm very lucky to have her as an illustrator.
I noticed that there's artwork in both the 2-sentence stories and horror haikus that fit each story in those sections. But when it came to the short stories, you only get the artwork between the title of each story. Why did you decide to scale back on the artwork in the short story sections to only the designs to the title cards?
Well, part of that was, I mean, I wasn't even expecting the story header art that she did. That was something that she did on her own. She did not do these illustrations for free. She and I negotiated what she called a fair deal. I think I should have paid her quadruple, but I just simply did not have that much money. She earned every cent, and then to come up with 10 extra drawings. There's a total of 40 drawings when you count those story headers. Although she has said in interviews that next time she wants to illustrate the stories as well. But we also have agreed on compensation for whatever book sales. I'm going to give her a percentage of what I make, because what she did and what I paid her for, she was grossly underpaid. And I wish I had more money to give to her. And, obviously I'm going to, as soon as I get royalty checks, like, I'm going to give her money. And yeah, just seeing this art, like I said, with the horror haikus and the 2-sentence stories, like we talked about that a little bit, where we did the horror haikus day thing, and then it kind of evolved into the 2-sentence Tuesday. So she had already done a lot of these drawings. There's one that she did in there that she definitely had to redo. The one for cheat meal, because there was a specific politician whose head was on the grill, and she thought that might not be politically correct, although it might be something that all of us might be thinking. It might not be as politically correct to show a decapitated politician with their head on a grill in a story about cannibalism. So she changed that a little bit. But she had already had, like I said, like the bones of what she wanted to do, and she redid them with her increased skill and her, in grayscale as opposed to color for social media. And I think she did an absolutely amazing job.
Each of the stories is around 5 to 10 pages. What made you want to keep the stories to that length?
Well, I think with these types of stories, several of them, so I have created in my head and in some published works what I call the Riftverse, which is an alternate version of Earth where there was an interdimensional rift and giant monsters of the Lovecraft variety have invaded, and this burst of energy came out, and it subsequently changed humans into like different categories. Like some were given enhanced powers, others were given, just driven mad, similar to the rage infected. They're not zombies, but the rage infected people of 28 days and weeks later. Other people just became absolutely terrible and like all their worst. inclinations kind of manifest to the forefront, in addition to all these giant monsters that came everywhere. So I kind of was telling different stories from that universe, and they didn't need to be overly long because they were going to be part of a larger narrative, like several of the stories. Too Ugly for Heaven. Tiny White Will Punch Your Fucking Lights Out. I always get this one wrong because I say it in the wrong order. The Twisted Tragic Tale of Michael Ravenshadow. Roboctopus, Croctopus, and The Girl on the Train. Those all kind of take place in the same universe, and they're all different perspectives on different people when the rift happened. I have a couple other stories, one that was in last year's More Lore from the Mythos anthology that came out in November of last year, called The Shed, which is Lovecraftian body horror. And I have another story in Volume 2, which comes out on October 17th, called Scavengers. And then I have another story that takes place in that universe coming out in another anthology that drops on Halloween called VHS Nightmares. So what I'm kind of doing is telling different stories from different parts of the world, from different points of view of different people. And it doesn't need to be a long narrative. Like, a lot of these are self-contained, and you'll never see them again. Others, I kind of consider them origin stories, because I think, the Raven Shadow story and the Too Ugly for Heaven and the Tiny White story, those are all going to be, those characters are going to be expanded upon at some point. And those folks, speaking of Trick or Treat Radio, those are all characters inspired, or named after, I should say. They're not inspired by, because, Raven Shadow is not a raving lunatic, and, Dynamo doesn't, run around killing people, and Tiny White is not the owner of a countrywide chain of restaurants. But I just wanted to name these characters after those guys, kind of immortalize them, because they were so cool to me, and we've become friends over the past 7 years. But yeah, I just thought their characters were cool, and name somebody after them. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying.
Yes. One of my favorite stories in the book is called The Librarian versus the Controller. How did you come up with that story?
I am a fan of riddles, so, Bilbo versus Gollum. That was a fun section of The Hobbit. Also, for folks who are familiar with Stephen King's Dark Tower series, the riddle contest with Blaine the Mono in Wizarding Glass, that one had a huge impact on me, partly because I read The Wastelands, and it ends with, "Let the contest begin." And I was fortunate enough not to read these as they came out, because I would have had to wait 8 years to see the beginning of this contest. But I had, unknown to me, purchased Wizarding Glass at a yard sale many, many years before. So as soon as I finished that, and I was like, oh my god, I need to know what happens next, I was like, oh shit, I have this book somewhere. And I tore apart my room looking for these books, and I found it, and I was able to read through the entire riddle contest. And the flaw in, so many different, computer stories, when there's a higher intelligence, is if you contradict its programming and force it to, make different decisions than it would normally make, and, kind of screw up its logic center. There's an episode of Futurama about that with Robot Santa. I put all those things together, and one of the main thrust of the joke, or the logic problem, was a thing I had read about an explorer who got captured by cannibals, and they would allow him to make one statement, and based on the statement, they would determine in which manner he would die. And so he made a statement, and he was allowed to leave because he thwarted their logic. And I was like, okay, how can I tell that story? I'll be honest with you, that's my least favorite of the stories that I've written in that book. It could have been fleshed out way more.
What made you want to use all caps for the controller's dialogue in that story?
To really illustrate, I should have put it in italics too, but to really illustrate, how loud, because, you have this young woman, Lena, which is short for Evangelina. I never say that, but it's short for Evangelina. She is standing in the middle of this room, and there is sound coming from everywhere, and it it's another way of the controller, who is this, sentient Skynet-like Big Brother type of AI system that has taken over the world. It's just another way to intimidate or show their superiority by completely dwarfing, the whoever happens to be talking to the controller at the time. Just bombarding them with sound.
Finally, you end your book with a couple of lists. Angry superpowers and awesome ideas that the Sci-Fi Channel should totally turn into films. What made you come up with the idea to include lists in this book?
Well, I had made one of these lists on like a Facebook post or something a while ago, and some people were coming up with some like really interesting powers, so I was trying to come up with some fun ones too. And then so I was like, well, I'm gonna take the ones that I did and just keep them. Maybe some point I'll use them. The awesome ideas that sci-fi should totally turn into films. I think that these would be fun asylum films, and like they're not out of the realm of possibility. Like I could see a way of doing each and every one of these in a way where, the characters involved could at least take them seriously. I mean, if they're ever looking for an idea, I've got lots of them, and I work cheap, so.
I have an idea what Sci-Fi Channel should do.
What's that?
I'll make that pitch right now. 5 hardcore horror fans are kidnapped by a mysterious movie producer who forces them to watch some of the worst remakes of all time. And they find out, as these films continue to go on, that the person that kidnapped them is none other than Jason Blum!
Oh.
I had to get that out there.
That sounds too real.
Yeah. Because I just think sometimes he just does stuff to insult hardcore horror fans' intelligence.
Yeah, like I said, it almost seems like he's trying to bring it down from the inside. Well, I have a question for you, Mr. Anthony T.
Yes.
And you said you have the book handy.
Yes.
So what I would like you to do is I would like you to open the book and to the first page that says itemized invoice on it.
Yes.
And see if you can check out the cool Easter eggs that I put into that invoice. If you take a look at some of the things, see how much you pick up on. Because this itemized invoice is specifically dedicated to the hardcore horror fan.
Ah, okay. Exorcism 24 hours. It's going to be in the Exorcist connection to one of these things. Can't figure it out because I've never seen that film.
Oh, you've never? All right, so I didn't know you've never seen it. So I'm gonna kind of go through and I'm gonna walk you through what these are, okay? So the invoice date and the invoice number, 12/26 in 1973. That is the day that The Exorcist appeared in theaters.
Okay.
The bill from Karras and Marin, those are the two priests. Bill to Chris McNeil, and that's the address that they had in the movie. And so I went and I checked what the tax rate is for that address, and it's 8.25%.
Wow.
So 8.25% on a subtotal of $615.24. Do you want to take a guess as to what that comes out to?
A lot of money.
$666.
Uh-oh.
And then you'll notice that the tips section is blank. But
what can you do?
So I let everyone make their own choice as to how much you would tip an Exorcist.
I've seen The Exorcist 3, but that's about it.
Is that the one with Patrick Ewing as the Angel of Death?
Oh, yes. I saw that on the last drive-in. That was like the worst week out of season 2.
I've seen all of them. I think there's the 5 total, because there's 2 prequels.
That's like the only Exorcist film I've ever seen. I have the original Exorcist at home. It's just I never get time to see that film.
I think you should make time to see that one because it's a classic and it's terrifying. I read the book, and you know what's crazy is the guy who wrote the book, William Peter Blatty, wrote it because he had been working in Hollywood and he was typecast because he kept writing scripts for Pink Panther movies, and they were like, "Oh, he just writes comedy," and he's like, "I'll show you guys," and then he wrote The Exorcist. It's like, well, way to break out of that box there, Chief. It's definitely stepping outside your comfort zone.
Yeah. Let's get back to the review. Let's get back on track.
Right. Sorry.
Not a problem. The book is being released by Source Point Press.
Yes.
How did that deal come about? Because they're usually known for comics and graphic novels.
So, at Scaricon last year, where you and I met for the first time, during the podcast awards, we had a booth right near comic writer Ben Goldsmith. And Ben ended up joining us on our show. He's got a huge personality, very talented writer, super funny, just like awesome to be around. Like you can't be in a bad mood around this guy. He's just awesome. We ran into him at Terrificon at Mohegan Sun later that year, and we were talking. It was his birthday too. He gave us some cake, and I was talking about, oh yeah, I put a book out a while ago. I never talk about it. I probably should. And he's like, oh, I didn't know you were a writer. We have a prose section at Source Point, and we're always looking for stuff. Like it would have to be at least 150 pages. And I'm like, well, I've got this thing that I've been working on. I call it, how much do you tip an Exorcist? And he's like, oh my God, that title. I love that title. He's like, oh, are you going to be at Boston Fan Expo? And I was like, no, we're not, we're not going to make it to that one. And he's like, well, what about Rock and Shock? I'm like, yeah, we don't miss Rock and Shock. Like, we'll be there. And he's like, all right, well, this guy Josh is going to be there. And Josh is like, the head guy in charge who decides what we're going to publish and what we're not. So, get something together and, make a pitch to him. So I had never made a book pitch before. I had no idea. Like everything that I had done was like self-published. I mean, my first two books, Cycle of the Hunter and Mist and Shadow, it's essentially, it was a publishing company that were like, yeah, just send us your book. We'll publish it. We don't care. Whatever. Like they didn't do any marketing or anything. And then when the books didn't sell, they're like, yeah, your $20 book from some guy no one ever heard of isn't selling. So we're going to start charging $25 and $30 for it. I'm like, yeah, that'll help. You can get a Stephen King book for $7.99, but yeah, someone's going to pay $30 for my book. Okay. So I again, not knowing what to do or how to do it, I polished everything up, put everything together as best as I could. And then I printed it out on regular printer paper and had like 300 sheets of paper that I gave this guy in like a little binder. And I was like, here's my book. It weighed like 12 pounds. And I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm like, I've never done this, but like Ben told me to talk to you. So I'm talking to you. This is my book. And he's like, well, what do you call it? And I'm like, how much do you tip an Exorcist? And he's like, I could sell it on that title alone. And so he loved the drawings that Jeanette did. He liked it. He was like reading through some of the stuff. He's like, this is excellent. He goes, I love this. Like he's like, I have so many things going through my head right now. Yeah, let's do it. We'll do it. So that's how it happened, because we made friends with Ben. Ben pointed us in the right direction. And, that's, the rest, as they say, is history. And Ben was nice enough to purchase my book and promote it. So I appreciate everything that he's done for me as well, and I make sure I give him credit every time because, I'll be honest, without Ben and without Jeanette, it doesn't matter how good what I've written is. Jeanette's artwork takes it to a whole other level. Like you see the artwork and you want to see what's written below. Like, what does this have to do with this? Oh my God, this artwork is amazing. I've had two different people, independent of each other, say, I want this tattoo. For the story Refusal. Both my wife and my friend Alyssa both want that tattooed because her art is that good.
Any other future projects that you have on the horizon, writing-wise?
Well, I touched on a couple of things really briefly earlier. I have a story called Scavengers that's coming out on the 17th of October, which happens to be Ashes Von Nightmare's birthday. It's called More Lore from the Mythos 2. It's a Lovecraft collection. It's an anthology, and I'm in there. There's some amazing writers in there. Steve Van Samson and Trisha Woldridge, who are phenomenal. Steve was in the first volume of that, More Lore Volume 1, with me as well. And Steve and I are actually in another anthology that comes out on Halloween called VHS Nightmares. It's a story. It's basically an anthology of a bunch of people who are just like, whether it's, a late night trip to the local video store or, something that you rented that wasn't quite what you thought it was going to be. That's kind of where mine goes. Mine's about 3 young girls that, they're in high school. It takes place in like 1991. So they're in high school and they rent a bunch of movies, and one of them is called Lesbian Cannibal Chainsaw Quinceañera 3, The Choppening. Just love that title. And I've had people tell me, like, I would watch that movie. And I'm like, yeah, I would too. But they all watch a movie and, like, some crazy shit happens with the tape and they don't know what to do about it. And it's pretty brutal. But I've got that. I'm working on actually turning a couple of scripts into movies. Scripts that I've written into short stories and vice versa. I actually do have something that I'm working on that I'm trying to expand a little bit and actually pitch as a movie script. So fingers crossed on that one. But yeah, I'm just going to keep writing. I write different articles for my website, throwdonthursdaypodcast.com. I just did a review of Anonymous Killers, the movie that dropped on October 6th. I do a Women in Horror section on that. I write for womeninhorror.net. I write sports articles. There's all kinds of stuff. It's, like you were saying earlier off air, like how busy we all get. Like I do Throw Down Thursday, and I do Shark Bites, and I do the Loudest Sports Show, and I do Indie Creator Spotlight, and I work full time, and I'm trying to watch movies and write, and and once in a while see my wife. So that's that's the goal.
Where can they find you on social media?
You can find me at the aforementioned throwdownthursdaypodcast.com. But you can follow me on Twitter at Patrick Rahall. On Instagram, same thing. You can follow the show on Twitter at TD Thursday Pod. Throwdown Thursday Podcast on Instagram. I'm on Facebook under PJ Rahall. And I think that's about it for social media.
Patrick, I want to thank you for coming on to my podcast again.
I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me about my book and help spread awareness of it. And thank you very much for purchasing it. And I will come on your show anytime because I love chatting with you. I think you're a phenomenal human being, and I always enjoy your thoughts on horror.
Thank you very much. Have a good day and stay safe.
Thank you. You too.
Every day there's a family struggling with hospital bills to care for their sick child who is fighting an illness. There's a woman who is fighting breast cancer and is having trouble making ends meet while paying for their treatment. And there are burn victims that are going through treatments to heal their deep wounds. There is a charity in the horror community that helps these people. Scares That Care is an organization that helps families deal with the bills for their child. They help women get the treatment they need to fight breast cancer, and they help people who are dealing with severe burns get the help they need to heal. Scares That Care is a 100% volunteer organization and 501c3 nonprofit charity that is dedicated to helping these people in fighting real monsters. To find out more information or to donate to Scares That Care, you can go to www.scaresthatcare.org. Every donation helps Scares That Care fight real monsters.
Hey guys, this is Steve and Christina. I'm the founder, owner, creator, and host of Super Retro Throwback Reviews. Are you looking for the best movie reviews, music reviews, video game reviews, and Comic-Con coverage all around? Well then look no further. Definitely check out Super Retro Throwback Reviews on YouTube and our new audio podcast, the new and improved Super Retro Throwback Reviews audio files version 2.0 on the following media distributors: Podbean, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iTunes, and Spotify.
Class is over, John. Time for something new and improved.
Welcome back to Anthony T's Horror Show. I am here with the founder and president of Fright-Rags, Benjamin Scrivens. How you doing today?
Good. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
How did you first discover the horror genre?
I saw Halloween on October 30th, 1981. I was 4 years old. So that was my first introduction. It was just on TV, and we were at a family friend's house, and I was bored, and my parents basically told me to go watch TV, and I went over and turned it on, and that movie came on, and I had never, being four, I had never seen anything like that before, and just since then, I've always loved horror movies. It's not like I went and started seeing everything I could, but I just wanted to see more of that type of thing. It just amazed me at the time. So I don't know, from then on, I've always had the love of the genre.
What are some of your favorite films?
Halloween is absolutely still my favorite film of all time, horror or non-horror. But in terms of other horror movies, it's a lot of the classics. Night of the Living Dead, Evil Dead, Texas Chainsaw, obviously. But some of the other ones that I like, Silver Bullet has always been one of my favorite movies. Even Trick or Treat, which is obviously a little bit more recent, but that's up there with one of my favorites. Of course, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. I've always been more of a slasher guy. I love, zombie films and giallo films and things like that, but I tend to gravitate towards slashers. Like I love Slumber Party Massacre and just anything, like The Burning, I'll just eat it up if it's somebody in a mask killing people.
Besides being the founder and president of Fright-Rags, you're also a graphic designer. What made you want to get into that field?
Actually, I've always been sort of creative and I guess artistic my whole life. I've always liked drawing and things, and I never knew what graphic design was, I guess. I knew kind of what it was, but I just never really knew about it as a career, and I learned a little bit about it more in high school. And back then, pre sort of computer manipulation in terms of like Photoshop and InDesign or even Quark, which is all these layout programs and things, we had to do everything by hand. And that was hard for me because as detailed as I can be, I can also be very sloppy in some other ways. So it was always like, I don't know if I want to do this. But when I discovered designing in Photoshop and making logos and like the actual user design, as we got into the internet age and websites started popping up, I found that it was an interesting blend of psychology and sociology and basically, I guess in some ways, manipulating information and imagery to create something that people liked, like they would see it and it was visually appealing, but you could articulate why it was visually appealing. It wasn't just like, oh, I like that logo, and that's fine, but why? And then you start realizing, oh, it's because blue is a soothing color, and it's because these, I really liked those elements to it. So that's kind of why I started getting into it even more and then took it in college.
What made you want to translate your love for horror and graphic design into the horror merchandising business?
It was really just this blend of wanting to be creative. This was back in 2003. And I was working at a job that I liked, but I was, I had some free time and I was a little kind of bored. And also I would spend a lot of time on horror websites or message boards, specifically message boards with people that made replicas, like a replica of Freddy glove or a Jason mask, or of course, my favorite Michael Myers masks. And I thought, wow, that's just so cool that people are using this creativity to make things in horror movies that I love. And I thought, what can I do? And I've always sort of been interested in quirky t-shirts. And so I was like, well, I don't really own any horror t-shirts. Why not? And I kind of looked some up online and I didn't see anything that really spoke to me. So I thought, well, I know how to design and I have a little bit of a screen printing background. So at least I understand a bit of the process. So I just thought, why not just make some horror t-shirts?
Were there any other reasons to why you also wanted to start Fright-Rags?
I mean, it was really to connect with people. I mean, I was such a fan of the genre, and I thought if I could just make something cool. And so basically when I started designing my own stuff under the permission, or with permission from a friend of mine who owned one of the bigger forums at the time that I was a part of, I posted my designs, and when people gave me positive feedback, like, oh, I'd wear that on a t-shirt, it was really one of the first times in my life that I had the potential to create something that someone liked enough to maybe to pay for and then wear it. And that just was such a trip. So to me, it was like, that was so cool. I never thought of it as a way to make money, like, oh, I was going to make this my career. I mean, I always wanted that, but I never knew that was going to actually happen. I was just in love with the idea of making something that other people liked and wanted to buy.
What made you want to set your base of operations in Rochester, New York, compared to a big city?
Well, I mean, this is where I was born and raised, and so I grew up here. And I'm, where I'm at right now, I'm in my house right now, but I'm, 2 miles away from where I grew up. So my wife and we decided to stay here because our family's here, and she grew up here as well. So I never, with the internet, the great thing about the internet is I didn't have to go to LA or New York or any other big city because we're online only. So we can service the entire world right from Rochester, and that's awesome because we ship worldwide. And knowing that I can still be around my family and be in the town that I grew up with, I mean, it's great to be driving by or riding my bike by the places that I saw this one movie for the first time, or rented all my movies as a kid. There's still a nice connection to that in my childhood.
On the Wikipedia page, when I was doing research, I found out that you put $600 of your own money for the first run of Fright-Rags shirts. What made you want to do that?
Well, it was a leap of faith. I had posted a couple designs on my friend's forum, and, people were saying that they expressed interest in wearing them as a t-shirt. And the only way I figured out I could do that is, like, I need to just buy a bunch of t-shirts and make them available for sale. So at the time, this was the only time I had done this, but my very first order was done on a website called customink.com. And, it was they were really basic shirts, but it was still very pricey. It was like $10 a shirt. And so I was like, well, let's order 20 of each design. So, $600 later. And I remember sitting there like, oh my God, it was on my credit card. It wasn't money that I actually had. I'd have to pay it back because it was on my credit card. I didn't know if I could, I didn't know if I was going to sell anything. So I'd never been in business before. I didn't know anything about business. So I just thought, well, I'm just going to try this out. I'd made my own website. I need to have a way for people to buy these things. So I just clicked buy now and check out and got the shirts and started there.
Was the success of that $600 made you want to expand Fright-Rags into a business? Yeah,
it happened really slowly. I mean, I did that first run, and people were ordering them, and, the money that I made, it's not like I went out and just spent it. I just kept it in a separate account because I knew ultimately I wanted to do more. So I was like, oh, well, I can reprint this one design, or I can make new designs. And at the time I found a printer that was right around the corner from my job at the time. He was working out of his house, and he actually printed all of our shirts from that moment, after that first order up until I think 2008. So the first 5 years, excuse me. And so he was able to work with me on pricing and ideas and things. So it was really the love of the creativity. So I just kept putting the money back into more t-shirts or more designs or more ideas. And listen, there'd be like weeks sometimes where I wouldn't get one order, and I'd be out there, posting on forums or doing whatever. And it just took a lot of time to build. But during that time, I was just so happy to be working on something that somebody liked somewhere.
What made you decide to start selling or licensing horror properties for your business?
Well, in the beginning, I'd started out, I knew that I was repurposing characters, popular characters such as Michael Myers and Jason and things. I knew that doing that without officially licensing them I could get caught and I could potentially get fined or sued or whatever. I knew that was a liability, and I knew that was something that if I was going to continue doing this, I'd have to work in somehow to get licensing, but it's like a chicken and egg thing. I think, I was way too small. I did not have the money to get into licensing. I did not have the know-how or any of this experience or knowledge. But so I just kept doing things unlicensed until, to be fair, my first license was like within 2 months of me starting up. And that was a very small license, Sleepaway Camp 2 and 3, which were some of my favorite movies anyway. But it was very uncomplicated. It was a very simple license to get because other companies can just get, 20-page contracts, things like that. So in the beginning, I always knew I wanted to license, and I always reached out to companies because, again, you don't know what you don't know. So I would just reach out and see what they could do. But it took several years before I started getting, another license that was a little bit bigger, and then a little bit bigger than that. And it just this process of kind of chipping away at it. And as soon as we had a few under our belt, we could get bigger ones. And as soon as we had those ones, we could get even bigger ones until, we were able to work with all the properties for the most part that we've ever wanted to. And I just knew that ultimately that was going to be the way forward if I wanted to be successful.
Now, what is the process in getting a license for something like Sleepaway Camp or Halloween?
So again, it's first of all, it's just finding who owns the movie, and that can be a studio or it can be a person. Like in the case of Sleepaway Camp 2 and 3, it was just a person, and I forgot how I got in touch with them, but it was a very simple email back and forth contract, and that was it. With something like Halloween or, like Jaws, for example, which is owned by Universal Studios, that's a much more detailed process. You find a contact, you try to, first of all, get them to reply to you. Sometimes it takes a long time. And then they're going to want you to send a proposal, and that proposal will include how long you want the contract, which is generally about 2 years, the royalty rate you're willing to give them per item you sell, and an advance against that royalty. So you have to pay money up front, and that can range from, again, depending on the property, it can range from nothing down to thousands and thousands of dollars up front before you even make one product. And there's a lot of, again, especially with a company like Universal, there's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of things you have to go through. These contracts are 20, 30 pages long, and there's a lot of back and forth. And then once you get the deal, it doesn't mean you can do anything you want. Things still have to get approved by them, and there's usually some strict processes for that. And you can't even a lot of times use people's likenesses. Again, depends on the movie. With Halloween we can, but with something like Jaws, we can't. We can't use anybody's face unless we get permission from that person or their estate. So every film is different. Every company's different.
Which studios are the easiest to deal with?
Right now, we have great relationships with pretty much everybody we work with, because most of the studios we've been working with now, we've actually had relationships for many years. So we've gotten very comfortable, and we know the people there, and you develop relationships sort of with them. We're very fortunate, especially, and if to be a little biased, because it is my favorite movie, but like a movie like Halloween, we're very fortunate to be working directly with the studio. The nice thing about that is, like any other situation, if I had an idea for a product, but it's not on our license, like we didn't ask for that category, there's a lot of back and forth to be able to add that category to our license. Whereas other properties, we can kind of just talk to them and say, hey, would you mind us if we did this item? And they'll be like, oh yeah, go for it. And it's just so much easier. They still have to approve it, but just the ability to have an idea and approach some of these companies and have them say, yeah, go ahead and try it is great, because then we can test the market.
Has there been a property that you've loved to get your hands on but haven't yet?
Yes. So basically, the one major studio we've been trying to get into is Warner Brothers, because they own many things. Among them, obviously, popular ones are Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. So those two I would love to work with on an official basis. But they also have, The Shining, Beetlejuice, Gremlins, and there's a bunch of things they have that I would love to. And we've talked to them on many occasions over the last several years, and their business model is just a little bit different. So it just hasn't been the right timing and opportunity yet. But we're hoping that changes eventually so we can work with them.
What have been some of your best-selling properties?
It's Halloween does great. The original film, anything Halloween related always seems to do well, and we're very happy with that because it's classic. Jaws, as I mentioned earlier, that actually is a really good one. Elvira is a great property to work with. She's awesome, and I'm glad that something like, she's been around a long time, but she is just as popular as ever, which is really cool. I'll tell you one thing that's been a great relationship and seller for us over the last few years is Joe Bob Briggs, who hosts The Last Drive-In on Shudder. We befriended him before that because I was always a fan of Monster Vision growing up, and we were able to do some Monster Vision shirts and some shirts based on him even before The Last Drive-In came out. And then he had this humongous resurgence with Shudder's Last Drive-In, which is amazing. And we were able to work with him on doing merchandise, and we've expanded that merchandise into action figures and things like that. And I tell you, people just love it. And I'm so grateful because I've always loved Joe Bob, and it's just great to see him having this renaissance later in his career.
How did the deal with Joe Bob Briggs come about?
So it's funny. I always have this list of like ongoing like ideas that I'd like to do, and Monster Vision was always on that list. And one of our main artists, Justin Osborne, reached out to me once, and we always have him working on something. And he's like, "Hey, have you ever thought about doing a Monster Vision shirt?" And I was like, "Dude, like, I would love to." And so I was trying to find his contact, Joe Bob's, because we wanted to bring him out to Rochester. We do pre-COVID, I guess, we would do a monthly screening we call Saturday Night Rewind, where we show a cult classic film, usually horror, and on film usually when we can, and have just one night a month. And it was just a lot of fun at this local theater, and we would try to get people to Skype in interviews or come here in person. And I wanted to build a Monster Vision set, so like the replica of his trailer and the TV and the lawn chair and everything, and have him do an intro for a movie, Monster Vision style, and then we would show the movie. And so he ended up coming out here to do The Warriors. This was October of 2016. So we had him out here for a weekend, and that's when we debuted our Monster Vision shirts and things. So that's really kind of the beginning of our relationship working together, because we had him come out here to do that and did the Monster Vision shirts at the same time. So we've been working with him ever since.
One of the things that you've been doing lately is selling out of limited runs of Joe Bob Briggs action figures. What made you want to get into action figures?
It was kind of a happenstance between a friend of mine who used to work for a couple of the action figure companies, Mattel and a couple other companies. And it's sort of a long story short, I had met his girlfriend out in LA when I was there a few years ago, having some meetings and things. And she's like, "Oh, my boyfriend grew up near you. He grew up in a town called Newark that's about 45 minutes away from Rochester." And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And then he contacted me separately. He goes, "Oh, I think you know my girlfriend. She works at Live Nation," because we were talking to them about licensing. I'm like, "Oh, yeah." So anyway, over the course of, and he was actually back here to visit his family. This was over the holidays. This is, I think, 3 years ago. And we had dinner to finally meet in person. And we were talking, and he's like, "Listen, I'm starting up my own company. Would you want to work together?" And I said, "Yeah. What are you doing?" Because he was doing action figures. I'm like, "What kind of figures?" And we talked about it, and we thought about some ideas that we could work on together. And, again, going back to how easy it is to add things to licenses, Joe Bob, we work with him directly. So it's like, hey, maybe there's an option to do a Joe Bob figure. No one's ever done it. We would be, we could do it. I can talk to him and his manager, and that shouldn't be a problem. And we did, and they were up for it. So that just seemed like a good one to start out with. Now, I did not anticipate the demand. And that's, the blue shirt figure that we released, we had committed to 1,000, again, because we can't just hold thousands in inventory. I mean, it's a lot of money tied up. It's a lot of space. We just can't order thousands and thousands of these things and hope they sell. It's just not what we can do. So, we committed to 1,000 knowing that, okay, maybe that we'll sell through these and it'll be a good test. Well, 1,000 of them sold out within 40 minutes. So we knew we had to redo it, but we also knew that people were buying it because it was limited edition. So we just changed the color of a shirt to a red shirt and opened it up for a longer pre-order period where we could add on to our existing order, and we were able to sell a bunch more. And then we just recently quietly sort of surprisingly announced the Halloween version that was a limited run on the Halloween Hideaway. So it was it's been fun, and we've got more in the works. We're working on Darcy for next year. A lot of people are asking for Darcy. Well, that's in the works, and that will be out next year. And we're also working on them for some other properties too.
So there are plans for other properties besides The Last Drive-In in the future in regards to action figures.
Yes, and it's too early to say what now, but I can say that we've got several planned. If it all goes well, several are planned for 2021 that I am super excited about. Again, for those I can't go into detail, but I can say that for me personally, it's like I'm excited for them. So I'm really hoping other people are as well.
Now back to the shirts. Explain how one of the shirts gets made from start to completion.
So generally when we have a license, we have a few artists that we work with kind of exclusively. So Justin, who I mentioned before, is sort of a flagship art of ours that we know, like usually when we get especially a bigger property, we want him to do his thing with it. But we also work with Kyle Crawford and a few other people. So we'll sit around and kind of think about what makes sense to do for this property. So I guess I'll just use Jaws again for an example. We're like, okay, we can't use people's faces and we can use this art and we can do this. So sometimes we'll just go to the artist and say, hey, here's what you can and can't do. Come up with some concepts, and they'll come back to us. And if we like them and we think they're within the parameters of the license, we'll send it to the studio and see if they approve it. And then we can continue on to the final stages, whether it's the next stage usually is then the colors and then the final design. And we have to go through a lot of stages of approvals. In some cases, again, the easier ones, we can show them a final piece if we know we're not doing anything that is not within the parameters of the license, and we should be good to go. Once it gets approved by the rights holder, then we can go into production. And many times we do print these ahead of time because we want to be able to ship them, right when they're released. We've run into some issues recently because things either sell out or just in higher demand. So we have to end up having to put on pre-order, but we send the artwork to our printer, and then our printer actually separates. They have to separate each color out of the design. So what you might see as a fully painted piece has to actually separate out into individual colors, and especially from our more complex ones, that can end up being 12 to 14 individual colors that are being printed, and they have to make a screen for each one of those and match those colors up. And so we get a digital proof that we sign off on. Okay, it's going to look like this, and then they can run it on press, and then we get the shirts. And our printer is 2 miles down the road from us. We work very closely with them. If there's any issues or anything we need to check on, I'll just go down there and go on press and see what they look like, and they'll tweak the colors right there for me, and we can kind of go back and forth. And then if I sign off on the right one, then they'll just go ahead with that. And then we get the shirts and put them up for sale. How
long does it take to make an average shirt?
It depends on the approval process. I mean, if we and the artist, I mean, there are times where an art might take 2 weeks. Approval might take another 2 weeks, and then we can get it printed in 2 weeks. So that's 6 weeks from initial concept to final design. And that varies. I mean, there are some times where we're waiting for approvals for a month or two. Sometimes the artist comes up with a concept and a final design. It gets approved that day, and we're sitting on it for a little while because we haven't scheduled the release for because we're trying for a month, because we schedule as far in advance as we can. I mean, I've got almost all of 2021 planned right now. I mean, at least for the most part, idea-wise. And then, the first 3 months we've got nailed down a little bit more than say the second quarter or third quarter. And things always move around. I mean, we can have everything nailed down on our end, but we might end up being late on approvals or something might happen, and things that are out of our control, then we have to be flexible enough to move things around, which we do all the time. I mean, I can literally on my end plan everything out because of the licenses we have and the artists we want to use. I can schedule everything and then end up having to change it. But so we can get something done really quick, or sometimes it just takes a long time, but usually it's because it's out of our control.
Have Fright-Rags shirts appeared at other stores?
Yes. So in the past, we've worked with Hot Topic. I worked with early on. They sold a few of our designs, and that kind of cooled off for a while. But in recent years, we've sold to Hot Topic and Box Lunch. We've actually had a few shirts this year in Spencer's. Even with COVID, we've been selling really good, a couple of our designs, and we've been in talks with doing more for Hot Topic and Spencer's for next year. Those are our two biggest wholesale in terms of, biggest exposure. Everybody else, we don't do a lot of wholesale. I mean, in fact, we do very, very little wholesale, and we like it that way. We like doing it direct to consumer. There are some mom and pop shops. There's a few shops like in Salem, Massachusetts, and in LA that carry some of our stuff, but we don't actively solicit those too much because we are very busy with what we have going on. And it can be hard to manage. We're a small team. We're only 8 people. We're just not a huge operation where we can manage all these things. With things like Spencer's and Hot Topic, we work with a third party company that can do a lot of the heavy work. So we're not printing and full, because with those companies, you have to not only print it, but you have to fold it, put the size tags on it, put the price stickers on it. You have to box them in a certain way. I mean, there's a huge process you have to go through. There's no way we could do that. So we work with another printer that can handle all that for us, because we just don't have the bandwidth. In fact, some of the things we've been doing recently, like the action figures and other things, we've had to have our t-shirt printer to help fulfillment. I've had my parents. I mean, I've filled up my van several times to bring orders and product over to my parents to fill these Joe Bob figure orders because we don't have the bandwidth or the space or the people to do it.
Besides shirts, I also found on your site that you sell trading cards. How did that happen, as I've seen trading cards for such properties as Child's Play and Night of the Living Dead on your site?
Yeah, so again, a lot of these ideas come about when we're kind of just talking amongst ourselves internally as it's just as a company, and I'll see something and for example, for the trading cards, I grew up loving trading cards, but I wasn't a sports fan, so I didn't collect baseball cards, but I liked the Fright Flicks cards, and I like, of course, Garbage Pail Kids and Mars Attacks and any other movie cards I could get my hands on, like Jaws or Dick Tracy or something. And so I was thinking one day, and we were probably just talking, I was like, no one's ever done trading cards for Evil Dead or Halloween or Night of the Living Dead. I take that back. People have done them for Night of the Living Dead. But my point was, I wanted them to be the old school cards. So part of what started the idea was I found literally the one person in the country that could do these wax wrappers like they used to be in this, 60s, 70s, 80s, because now everything is, that kind of foil wrap, and it's all really high quality cards and all this stuff. I wanted to go old school. I wanted to have that cardboard back, everything. I wanted the gum too, but unfortunately, FDA prevents you from putting the gum in these things now. But I wanted it to look and feel like it came out when the movie came out. So like Halloween, I want these things to look and feel like they came out in 1978. I want that flexo printing on the wrappers where it's not completely lined up. I wanted, I just wanted them to ooze authenticity. And that's what we've strived to create. I didn't want to do just trading cards. I didn't want to just make trading cards. I wanted to make vintage style wax wrap trading cards, because I just felt that would just be so cool. And luckily they've been received really well. I've been really thrilled with, and the thing is, trading cards are very complex to do. There's a lot of things I had to learn. And of course, there's a lot of issues with licensing and, again, using images from the movie and likenesses. So unfortunately, we are not able to do all of the ones that I've always wanted to do, in terms of, there's some properties where it's just impossible. There's just no way we could do it because we're not allowed to. But we've been able to do them for amazing properties, like, again, Halloween, Night of the Living Dead, and Evil Dead, Chucky. We've got more coming too. So we definitely are able to work on some great properties, and we've got a couple awesome ones coming up.
Besides trading cards, Fright-Rags also sells posters, pins, hats, lounge pants, and socks. What made you decide to branch out besides shirts?
Well, I think, I used to think, you can only have so many shirts, although I see some of our customers, they have like literally over 100 of our shirts. But, it's funny to say, I'm not only the president, but I'm a user of our products, right? So as much as I love t-shirts, when people come home from work, they just want to relax, so they end up getting into their comfy pants. Well, why not get into some comfy horror pants? And my wife had bought me some these lounge pants several years ago that legitimately were the most comfy pants that I've ever worn. They're just these amazing that I would just want to wear them all the time. And I thought, well, I would love to wear these with like Halloween on them or House of a Thousand Corpses or something. So I found a company that could do it. Socks, same thing. Like, there's a lot of people that can't wear our t-shirts out in public, at their job or whatever. I've seen people like in like security or police officer uniforms where obviously they can't wear a Teen Wolf shirt or whatever, but they can wear socks because they're covered up. So they can still show their love of movies and the genre in other ways. So it's really just taking what we like and seeing if there's a way we can express the genre into these other items and categories that make sense. And again, I always want it to make sense. Like, I don't want to get into something just to get into it. I want to kind of see a bigger picture and be like, oh yeah, I can totally understand how that could fit.
You also do conventions, right?
Yeah, before COVID, we would do conventions about 4 times a year.
Now, what conventions would you usually go to?
So Monster Mania in Cherry Hill, New Jersey is definitely the one we hit up the most. I mean, that's twice a year. That's generally in March and August. And then we do Horror Hound in Cincinnati in March. We were going to attend Texas Frightmare this year. Obviously, COVID had other ideas, and we are slated to do it next year. Obviously, we'll see what happens. And so those are the ones that we frequent. I mean, we did the Halloween 40th anniversary a few years ago, which was amazing. That was in LA. We do what we can. Again, we're being this smaller crew that we are and generally pretty busy. It is hard for us to take the time out because we have to drive, to wherever we're going usually, which takes, some time, an extra day or two. But we love being out and seeing our friends and seeing customers and stuff. So it's great to do when we can do it, but unfortunately, sometimes time just doesn't allow us to get out to many more.
What products does Fright-Rags have upcoming in the future?
Well, we've got some new things in the works. We had just done a Halloween lunchbox, which sold really well. So we've got a couple other lunchboxes in the works for next year. We've got more action figures and even these Nanoforce little army men we did. We've got another one in the works for that. More, sooner we've got another collection for Silent Night, Deadly Night coming up. That'll be coming up on Black Friday. That will basically be our last release of the year because we've got a big sale coming up, and generally Black Friday orders tend to take us a while to get through. We're usually pretty slammed, so we want to just make sure that we've got the time to fill them. So we decided to have everything kind of come out on Black Friday, but we've got a really cool Silent Night, Deadly Night sweater coming out. It's like a full-on, like, ugly sweater. It's not like a sweatshirt with print on it. Like, it's a full-on custom sweater that we're doing, which I'm pretty excited about.
Is the Black Friday sale that's upcoming the only sale you do all year?
No, we generally do other sales. This year, we did not have a chance to do any other sales because, honestly, this year has been, again, it's been an anomaly for everybody in many ways, but we didn't know what to expect when COVID sort of started shutting things down in March. And, we weren't sure with this pandemic, what was going to happen to our business. We were all worried that maybe, you know, during a pandemic, people just aren't going to want to buy horror t-shirts and merchandise. What we found very quickly after things started happening in mid-March is that was not the case. In fact, it exploded our business to a point where we could not handle the volume of orders that we've been receiving. In fact, September and October were our biggest months ever as a company. And, you know, we're up a very large percentage from where we were last year. And, you know, last year was a great year. So to do sales, our normally planned sales throughout this year, just wasn't an option because we couldn't keep up with what we were doing to begin with. And again, you know, you just end up starting to hit a wall, and we were just getting so backed up. So, this year though, you know, for sales, Black Friday obviously is going to be a big sale. And then we generally do post Christmas, like December 26th through the end of the year, because we shut down between Christmas and New Year's anyway. This year we're doing a full 2 weeks because we need it. We need a reset for next year because it's been a crazy year. So we'll do a sale in between Christmas and New Year's. Well, when we get back, you know, we'll fill those orders, but those will be the two biggest sales this year.
Where can they find you and Fright-Rags on social media?
Well, you can on Instagram and Twitter, it's just one word, Fright-Rags. On Facebook, it's just facebook.com/Fright-Rags. And, of course, our website is frightrags.com, but that is fright-rags.com.
Benjamin, I want to thank you for coming on to the podcast.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Have a good day and stay safe.
Thanks, you too.
You'll find Anthony T's horror and wrestling show on these social media platforms. On Facebook, Instagram, and the Slasher app at Anthony T's Horror and Wrestling. And on Twitter at Anthony T's Horror. You'll find new episodes on darkdiscussions.com, major podcast providers, and YouTube. So, what is Anthony T watching? I was originally going to watch Veronica, the new Glenn Danzig movie that is rumored to be one of the worst movies of all time, as it's gotten a lot of comparisons to The Room. I teased it on my live stream recently that I was going to do it this episode, but I'm going to have to hold it off until next episode. Don't worry, I will still talk about this film because I have a obligation to talk about this film because this might be the greatest guilty pleasure film of all time. Or maybe not. But you'll have to wait till next episode because I just saw a film that is probably more insane, like Veronica. I am talking about Troma's latest release, Mutant Blast. The film recently made its way to VOD through Troma's new streaming service, Troma Now. This is a film I've been wanting to see ever since seeing that sick trailer for that film. It's like Glenn Danzig's Veronica, I had a very curious interest in wanting to see this film for better or worse. And before I go into my thoughts on this film, I'm going to say this right now. Mutant Blast is Troma's most craziest film ever. And yes, they've done some crazy films like Poultrygeist, The Toxic Avenger, Return to Nukem High, Volume 2. But this really tops all of them. Seriously. Because this is what you have when you get to see Mutant Blast. You get a mutant lobster. A hideous, monstrous duck that is more hideous than the duck in Return to Nukem High Volume 2. You get a sword-wielding dolphin. And the absurdity continues. You get a giant monster-sized rat. And, of course, you get superhuman strength soldiers, and zombies. Oh, wait a minute. I can't say zombies because the word zombies get bleeped out almost every time in this film. This film is so crazy. I loved it. This is definitely a top 3 Troma release. I never thought I would see a film that was not directed by Lloyd Kaufman be a crazy and whacked out film from start to finish, but Mutant Blast is that film. The film is a Portuguese action horror comedy directed by Fernando Alé. If I mispronounce it, I apologize, but this film really is making me crack up. His direction in this film was very good. This film may have no plot whatsoever, but I have to admit, a lot of the scenes were just so jaw-dropping that it does a great job keeping you glued to what is going on. Alé does a great job making sure that all the action and death scenes feel very gory, feel very and far out there. Seriously. This is definitely a film you really need to check out. This film also has some great humorous moments as well, plus the fact that it also has solid lead performances. Mutant Blast, by far, is up there as one of my favorite films of this year, because this is the most fun that I have had seeing a film. And this is by far my favorite non-Lloyd Kaufman directed Troma film, because this is a film that I'm going to be wanting the Blu-ray like now. Seriously, please, Lloyd, release the Blu-ray of this film. I want the Blu-ray so bad. But I can go on and on about Mutant Blast, but we don't have much time here on this episode, so definitely rent or purchase Mutant Blast over on Troma now, as that's the only place you will be able to find the film. Go to watch.troma.com and do Troma a favor and purchase this film, because I would like to see this film be rented or purchased in a good number, because I really want to see Lloyd Kaufman's latest film, and one of the ways we are going to see Lloyd Kaufman's latest Shakespearean effort if this film does well on VOD. If this film does well on VOD, maybe we can get Uncle Lloyd to release his latest film on VOD. Because let's face it, back to my rant earlier on theaters, we don't know how many independent theaters are going to be left after all is said and done. So, us Troma fans really need to help support Mutant Blast, because if this does well, maybe we will see Shakespeare bleep storm a lot sooner. Because, quite frankly, we need to show Lloyd that us Troma fans are willing to rent and purchase first-run Troma films on their streaming service. Go to watch.troma.com and definitely support Mutant Blast. I hope you enjoyed the Best of Anthony T's Horror and Wrestling Show Volume 4. I've been up to a lot of things between episodes. First off, I joined a new podcast called The Dead Kids of Derry. This is a Stephen King podcast where we do audio commentaries on Stephen King films that brings together the hosts of Shock Treatment, Culture Shock, and this podcast, Anthony T's Horror and Wrestling Show, as we do a commentary track on a Stephen King film each month. The first episode is up already on Spotify, as we did a commentary track for Carrie, check that one out. And then on Anthony T's Horror and Wrestling Show on YouTube, I will finally have that VS Halfway to Black Friday video up between episodes, as everything's been recorded. I just have to put it together. That should be up right after this episode. So give it like first week of August. That video should be up on the YouTube page, as I'm going to get ready to do another episode for the YouTube page, as yours truly has the Severance sale and the Criterion Collection sale to deal with on the next episode of the vlogcast after the VS sale episode. So check that out on YouTube. Next episode, I will give you my thoughts on Terrificon, as yours truly will be going to that convention for the first time, as there's 3 major stars from AEW that are going to be there: Darby Allin, Sammy Guevara, Ty Conte. They also have Michael Rooker, Sheen Gunn, and more. I can't wait to attend this convention over at Mohegan Sun in Connecticut. I'll give you my thoughts on that convention. You can follow my time over at Terrificon on the weekend of July 30th to August 1st over on Anthony T's Horror and Wrestling Show's official Instagram page at Anthony T's Horror and Wrestling. And also, I will have something next episode. It'll be either an interview or a list. One of the two. So you're going to get either an interview or the list of Anthony T. So keep an eye out for that. Also, if you're in the Williamsburg, Virginia area on the weekend of July 30th to August 1st, stop by the Doc Discussions booth over at the Scares That Care Weekend 7 event, as Philip and Michael from Doc Discussions will be there, as they will have a booth at that convention. Definitely stop by that event. It's really helping a great cause. With that, I want to thank you for listening to this podcast. Have a good day and support indie horror and indie wrestling.